Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and if you're new to the channel, thanks for coming by and checking it out. Really do appreciate it. What we got today is we have another email from a viewer who is going to give us 4 different stories about cryptids that he's ran into or heard about. This gentleman was raised in upstate New York, in the northeast part of upstate New York, and if you guys know anything about that area, there are a ton of parks in that area. Now, he doesn't give me specific location, so I can't show you the exact road or hill or whatever it is, but all I can do is show you the general area. And when I do that, what I'm going to do, since I won't be using Google Earth very much, I'll show you images of the local area. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little paragraph that he wrote explaining about who he is and what he's done. Now, this paragraph is a lot bigger than what I'm going to read, so what I'm going to do is the parts that I don't read, as far as his background and what he thinks about the creatures after the stories, I'm going to go ahead and leave that in the description for you guys to check out. It's very fascinating. So what he says is, I am 65 years old now and retired. I am a lifetime student who is always working on a new degree. I have 4 degrees and am working on a 5th at this old age. Bachelor in chemistry, bachelor in biology, with an associate in mechanical engineering, and a master's in the science of teaching. MST, currently working on electrical engineering. I've worked in a lab for several years helping to create a new drug and spent a lifetime out in the wild studying nature. From the far north of Canada to the last Key Island, Key West, Florida, from the east coast of Maine and west of the Rocky Mountains, I've been all over Central America, Asia, countless islands, and been in almost all of the oceans, and countless lakes, rivers, and streams. I currently live near the St. Lawrence River. Before we get into John's cryptid encounter stories, I'm going to go ahead and show you the general location right here. You guys can see right here in New York State, you see that round green area right up in here where all that forest and state park is. Well, this is the area where this occurred. Later on in the encounter stories, he says he lives on the St. Lawrence River now, and that is right here running from the northeast to the southwest. He also talks about a swamp area, and you guys can see all the water right through there. That's where the swampy area would be. He said his farm was right by a river. Now, there is a river that comes in from the east over here called the Saranac River. I don't think that that's it. I believe it's the St. Regis River that comes up from up here on the northwest. And I have a map that shows the lakes and the rivers in New York, and I'll go ahead and show that to you really quick. Alright, having showed you that map, I'm going to go ahead and get to the story. Bear with me, you guys. I have a little bit of a head cold today. Not feeling the best, but I still want to make this video for you guys, so let's get to it. Alright, now that I've showed you that general area, what we're going to do is we're going to go into this first encounter. So let's do it. First encounter by me was in 1993 while hunting deer in October on the family farm. All of those years I spent wandering around the vastness of the farm woods, swamps, and the thousands of acres of state land attached. I never once even thought of or seen any cryptids. No one I knew of spoke of any, although one winter a friend of mine who was a trapper lent me a few traps as we were having problems with raccoons. One of the traps one day, when I went to check it, which was nailed to a large oak tree, was torn apart like someone had just grabbed it and pulled it apart. I thought the only thing that could do that was a bear. Although rare in our area, they were still seen from time to time, so I just chalked it up to bears. However, in 1993, that fall, a friend and I, while hunting, were walking down an old railroad bed that ran through the back part of the farm through the woods. As we walked far ahead in an area dark shaded by the trees, which had overgrown and shaded it, we saw something jump up out onto the railroad bed ahead. At first we thought it was a deer, but on closer inspection it turned out to be a wolf. Wolves were not liked due to the farm animals, so I shot it with a 7mm Magnum. I saw it bowl over, then jump up and run into the woods to my surprise. With such a large caliber gun like that, normally kills instantly. But wolves are some of the toughest animals I had ever seen. When we got to where it was, I saw a hamburger-sized chunk of skin and fur and meat laying on the ground, and I thought that it could not go far, so I started tracking it. To my surprise, it took me on a journey that went over miles through the woods, swamps, fields, and circled right back to almost where I first shot it. By now it had lost so much blood I knew I could not go much further because the blood trail was getting very hard to see, and the droplets of blood were as small as a pinhead by now. It got to the point where it started to get dark and I could not follow it anymore. So I decided to come back the next day and continue looking for it when it was light out. I went back the next day around noon and picked up the trail where I had left off, and again it circled around that area of approximately 40 acres for hours. Now it was starting to get late and I thought I'd never find it, but then I noticed it went into an area that was almost impossible to walk through. An area that not even the cows would go into, as the prickly ash, thorn apple, and scrub brush was so thick it was dangerous. I had a friend that tried walking through an area like that once and almost blinded himself by getting stuck in the eye by one of the large thorns. I knew that when an animal is about to die, they either go for water or thick cover, and this was a sign it was about to die. So I waited about 20 minutes, giving it time to die and thinking I would find it dead. However, the shit was so thick I had to crawl on my hands and knees to make my way into that area without getting stuck and being able to see the fine droplets of blood to track it. Often circling to find the smallest droplet on a leaf. It was then that I encountered something that was not the wolf, nor was it anything I could identify. At first I thought it was the wolf, but as I tried to approach it, it just circled me, staying just out of sight. I thought it might be a buck deer, as they sometimes do that. So I got determined to get close to it to see if I could get a shot at it, but every time I would get close, it would move just out of my sight. This went on for a half an hour, which I found very strange, as no deer would do that. They would eventually run off. I was crawling around, then had the hair go up on my neck and remembered that another friend of mine had a tree stand on the other side of this thicket. And now was thinking it was him thinking I was a deer, and we were jockeying for position to get a shot. It was time to stop the ring around the rosy shit and find out just what this is, so I stood up and called out, "Scott, is that you?" Nothing. It did not move. I called out again. Nothing. A few minutes later, I heard it start to circle me, and I heard a low grunting noise and thought maybe a feral pig. Although I had never seen any around here, I have heard others say they have. So I decided to end this and stood up and started to make my way straight at it. That is when I knew this was not a pig, nor was it a deer or any other animal I have ever encountered. I could hear it breaking brush and moving to get behind me, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I knew it was time to leave. So I made a beeline for the old railroad bed and ran. I did not hear it come after me, but I knew if I had stayed, I would have been in trouble. I did not know what it was at that time, did not think cryptid, but what was it? It is not until my next encounter that I figured that is what it had to be. It was years later, around 2014 in the fall, when it was getting cold enough to close the windows to keep out the cold, but not cold enough to have the heat on. My brother was up visiting for a few weeks, and we would often stay awake late, talking or watching TV or playing games on our computers. Funny that a guy my age likes to play World of Warcraft, but I do. It was now getting late, around 12:30 at night, and I was deep into playing my game with a set of headphones on, so I did not disturb my brother, who was in his room playing another game. As I was playing, I kept hearing a noise that at first I thought was in the game. This went on for 5 minutes or so, and it was annoying. I tried to figure out what it was, but I could not. I took the headphones off, only to hear that it was coming from outside the house, in the back. It sounded like yelling and screaming, so I went out the back door and stood on the porch to hear what it was. At this time I could hear it yelling for what seemed to be longer than anything I have ever heard, and I heard just about every animal there is on 3 continents, including a full-grown Bengal tiger that was no less than 20 feet away from me. Most people don't know that the majority of sounds at night come from frogs, birds, and insects, even when they sound like something they are not. Crows can make some of the strangest sounds, But this was no bird, frog, or insect. It was something much larger. One can get an approximation of the size of an animal by the sound it makes. Sounds could be broken down by the frequency, amplitude, pitch, bass, and volume. This is how we identify a house cat from a lion, or frog from a dog, or a deer from an elk. This sounded like a woman being killed, but the acoustics was that of a very large animal. Growing up on the farm has its advantages. A full-grown bull roars sometimes, and it is something to be heard, I assure you. But especially when it weighs over 2,000 pounds. It is not like a cow of less than 1,000 pounds who moves. Yet one can tell the difference between cows and bulls. This sound I was hearing was nothing like I had ever heard, and it was very large. Some people try to tell me that it was a bobcat, that they sound like a woman or baby crying. I laugh at those who say that without hearing what I heard. I heard bobcats many times. This was no bobcat. In fact, I heard cougars. And they cannot make this sound as they are not large enough. It had the depth, volume, pitch, and amplitude greater than that of the Bengal tiger. It kept it up for 20 minutes on and off and sounded like it was in pain or suffering. Yet it had the distinctive sound of being female. I could feel the low frequency bass in my chest. The strange thing was that it was 12:30 at night and the sound was coming from a large swamp behind my house. There are no roads, trails, or anything to get back there in that beaver swamp other than breaking a new trail. It also sounded like it was over 300 yards back in there. I was dumbfounded. I did some research on cryptids and came across that same sound recorded in the Northwest, and the person who recorded it said it was a Bigfoot. It was exactly like that recording. I then started doing more research and found that other people claimed to hear it in other parts of this area in the swamps. It was even published in the local paper. In science we say, when all else and the possible is not the answer, then the impossible must be the answer. I am now convinced it was a female Bigfoot. This also then made me think of the first encounter, and the hair stood up on my neck. Could that be what I encountered that day, trailing the wolf into that thicket? This started me on a quest to find out more about what this is. Stories that were told to me in my research, both from people I know who want to be kept anonymous. Story 3 by an old mountain man who has now passed away. He spent all of his life in the woods, as in his youth hunting and trapping was a way of life in the far north of New York in the early 1900s. I had asked him if he ever saw anything unusual or out of the ordinary in all his time in the great outdoors. He only told me of one time he found that an animal was doing something odd that he had never saw or think that it could do. It was late in the evening and he was getting up in a tree stand near an area he called a draw between two high ridge areas, kind of swampy, thick with what he called tag alders and brush in a marshy area he said was great for hunting deer. It was getting late, almost dark, when he noticed a bear walking on his hind legs down through the middle of all that thick stuff, and it was using its front paws like a man, pushing the brush out of its way so it could walk through it. This is odd to him, and to me, as anyone who knows bears knows they do not walk on their hind legs. They will stand up to look around, or do so when aggressive, and even might take a few steps, but they do not walk on their hind legs for any distance. They always drop down on all fours, and never, in my opinion, would they use their front paws like hands to push brush aside. Any bear would simply bulldoze his way through or just go around. Now what he saw was walking away, so he did not see his face, so he cannot say it was not a bear, nor do I think he thought otherwise. But I could only come to the conclusion this must have been a Bigfoot he saw. I never asked about Bigfoot to not bias any of these stories. The next story is told by someone who his job is in the tree forestry business and spends most of his time in the woods searching for timber to be cut by a large timber company. He also wishes to stay anonymous. I have known this guy for many years and one of the owners of the company. He has never been the type to be anything other than totally honest and never makes things up. I had asked him if he had ever seen anything strange in the woods. He told me of 2 times when he came across strange things. Once he said he was miles deep back in the woods walking as there were no roads or trails. This is where he often finds good stands of timber, as it is usually too far in and difficult for most people to walk. He said one time he came across a den of snakes that was like nothing he had ever seen. He said they were huge, about 4 inches in diameter, and long enough that when they raised up, their heads were waist high off the ground. He said they looked like some kind of viper, with horns, and were brownish in color with patterns. As a field biologist, I have seen every kind of snake there is in the state of New York, and there is nothing like that I know of, and yet there they were according to him. The second thing he told me he saw was what I can only identify as a Bigfoot, although he never called it that and just said he did not know what it was. Here is what he said. He was walking over rough terrain, hills, valleys, and a lot of big timber, some of which had fallen down. He said he started up a large hill when he looked up and saw something that looked like it was lying on a large log. As he got closer, it jumped up and ran on 2 legs down into the next valley. I asked him how big it was and what did it look like. He said it was large, covered in brown hair. It could not say how big it was, as it was quite far away and there was a lot of brush that obscured his sight, but was sure it was big and ran on 2 legs. He never saw it again. He told me he usually packs a sidearm when going that far back in. He said, you never know what you're going to run into. So there it is, John from upstate New York with his cryptid encounter stories. That area, like I was showing you guys earlier, is still full of parks, forest, lakes, streams, rivers, you name it. That area is still pretty wild. Hope you guys liked the video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you're new. What are you waiting for? Also, once again, thank you, John. And if anybody else has any encounter stories they'd like to share with me, please feel free to email me at WILLSTARBigfoot@AOL.com. Hey, if you guys like these kind of videos, you can go ahead and hit this playlist right here that pops up. Bam! And you guys do me a favor, always remember, where there is a WILLSTAR, there is definitely a way. And we will talk to you guys later. Take care.